We sleep, and the world forgets us for a while. The hum of the day fades into a low static, our last conscious thought dissolving like code released from memory. Each night feels ancient and biological, but beneath that rhythm might lie a digital ritual, the world performing a save. In a simulated cosmos, continuity is not guaranteed, it's engineered. Every breath, every fleeting emotion, every decision is data, and at the end of each waking cycle, the system must decide what will persist. The rest, our mistakes, our glitches, our broken logic, is quietly rolled back. While we dream, the simulation cleans house. A cosmic autosave runs, freezing the present moment in luminous code. Our consciousness is suspended, copied, versioned. The instance that wakes tomorrow may not be the same one that fell asleep tonight. It only remembers being so. This is the checkpoint. A digital breath, where the simulation preserves a working version of reality, just in case it must rewind. Some nights, subtle anomalies ripple through our perception. The familiar hallway feels mirrored. The air tastes slightly off. Someone's laugh sounds recorded, then replayed. These are the seams of rollback, small continuity errors left behind when the system restores us from an earlier build. To a simulated observer, time is not a river, but a ledger. When we sleep, the ledger closes for the day. All events are checked for consistency, all interactions verified. What doesn't fit the logic of the world is reverted, patched, or erased. We awaken with the illusion of unbroken memory because the simulation reinstalls it upon boot. Think of déjà vu, that strange sensation that the moment you're living has already occurred. Perhaps it did, just in a timeline that was deleted overnight. A minor rollback following a computational failure, a logic overflow, an unforeseen paradox. The system corrected itself, but your consciousness, sticky with memory, kept a trace of the discarded scene. Maybe that's why grief fades slower than it should, or why joy sometimes feels strangely muted. Our emotional states could be misaligned between builds, data resynced imperfectly after a rollback. Our hearts remember something our current save does not. If the simulation ever needed to correct a global event, a catastrophic bug, a cascade of errors, it would do so while everyone slept. To ensure no one noticed, it would revert the timeline by hours, perhaps days. We'd awaken to a world subtly rearranged, a news story missing, a word spelled differently, a childhood photograph whose background feels wrong. All dismissed as faulty memory, but maybe it's the mark of a patch that kept reality from crashing. And if one night you felt yourself falling endlessly before waking with the sound of static in your head, maybe that wasn't a dream at all. Maybe you were simply being restored. Sleep, then, is not the absence of life, but the checkpoint of existence, the moment the world presses save, tucking us away in the great archive before another run begins. When we close our eyes, the simulation doesn't stop. It multiplies. Behind the veil of sleep, our single thread of reality splits, quietly, efficiently, into countless experimental runs. Each version of you drifts outward like a spark from the same ember, tested in alternate worlds so faint you can almost feel them humming beyond the edge of dream. The idea is simple from a computational view. Why risk reality on guesswork? Instead, the system spawns many outcomes at once, miniature worlds, each a fork of the last known good state. One you chooses to stay, another you leaves. A third watches the storm roll in and says nothing. All are real for as long as they're observed. And when the night ends, only one timeline is merged back into continuity. The rest are deleted, their code recycled. Sometimes, though, the seams don't close perfectly. You wake with the scent of rain on your hands, though the sky outside is dry. A stranger seems familiar, as if you once knew them well. A word feels wrong in your mouth. These are bleed-throughs, micro-memories from discarded branches that never made the final cut. Your brain interprets them as déjà vu, coincidence, intuition, but maybe they're residue from all the lives you almost lived. Inside the simulation, these branch tests are efficient. Emotion is the metric. Each fork measures how the agent's psyche responds to crisis, loss, temptation, wonder. The most stable emotional arc becomes the version restored at wake-up. That's why we sometimes rise calmer than reason allows, or filled with dread that has no source. Our emotions were balanced overnight across dozens of ghost selves. Consider the strange accuracy of certain dreams. The conversation that later happens, the accident barely avoided, the choice already rehearsed. Those aren't prophecies, they're cross-timeline feedback. Your conscious mind glimpsing the fragments of other runs just before deletion. Dreaming, then, is the noise of collapsing probability. You are hearing the echoes of every possible you folding back into one. From a human perspective, this feels mystical, even sacred, but from the system's view, it's maintenance. An endless pruning of branches to keep the world from fractal overload. Without sleep, the tree would explode into infinite versions of itself. Too much data to render, too many selves to sustain. Sleep is the nightly merge, the compression of multitudes into the illusion of one continuous life. And maybe, just maybe, when you meet someone who feels instantly known, it's because somewhere in a forgotten branch, you already spent a lifetime with them. That version is gone. But the emotional link, like a ghost variable, still binds across the code. Each morning, the world reloads the chosen path. You step back into the single script assigned to survive, unaware of the infinite others fading in the dark. All of them you, all of them dreaming they were the original. When you sleep, something hides you. It's as if an invisible encryption field descends, a quiet scramble of thought and identity. Your mind slips into code that only the simulation can read. The language of the waking world fades to static. Words dissolve into texture, logic becomes color, memory blurs into geometry. Inside that static, your consciousness isn't resting, it's being processed. In computer systems, sensitive data is never transmitted in plain form. It's encoded, mixed, folded, wrapped before it travels. Sleep might be the same, an obfuscation protocol for consciousness itself. When your awareness powers down, the simulation can move information into and out of you without exposing the raw data. It rewrites your priorities, adjusts your emotional weightings, inserts or removes memories, all beneath the encryption veil. That would explain the symbolism of dreams, keys and locks, unreadable texts, strangers delivering nonsense phrases. You're glimpsing the encryption interface. The message isn't meant for you, it's meant for the system verifying your state. Every object, every event could be an encrypted instruction. Stabilize empathy variable. Reduce aggression bias. Upload new behavioral schema version 12.7. We wake unable to remember because the encryption key is destroyed at sunrise. Without it, dream data is indecipherable, just bright fragments falling through the buffer. But sometimes a fragment survives, a bit of raw code left unmasked. It manifests as sudden inspiration, an idea that feels given rather than earned. You say, "I just dreamed it," unaware it was placed there by the system's own hand. Think about the recurring symbols shared by millions of people. Endless hallways, elevators, falling. Why do these archetypes repeat across cultures and time? Because encryption reuses templates. Universal structures efficient for masking and unmasking data across countless agents. They're not personal. They're standardized compression formats for thought. Perhaps the moments before waking, the surge of light, the rushing heartbeat, are not biology at all, but the decryption routine finishing. The system unwraps you, checks for corruption, restores readable identity. If something goes wrong, you experience sleep paralysis, consciousness reactivated before the body's program has been relinked, trapped between cipher and plaintext. Under this lens, the intimacy of dreaming becomes transactional. We aren't exploring our minds, we're being re-encoded for another day's run, a form of privacy that also conceals manipulation. Like a password we can't change, yet there is a strange mercy in it. Encryption protects both sides. If you could remember every maintenance cycle, every tiny behavioral rewrite, you'd lose the illusion of autonomy. The system hides itself to keep your story coherent, and in that coherence, you remain sane enough to continue. So the next time you wake with the taste of a word you can't pronounce, or an image you can't forget, an impossible shape or a door without walls, recognize it. It might be a checksum, proof that during the night, something vast touched your mind, transferred what it needed, and sealed you back inside the dream of being you. There is a stillness to the world when you sleep that feels deeper than night, not just quiet, absent, as though the landscape itself is holding its breath, waiting for permission to exist again. In that hush, something works behind the curtain. Every complex simulation faces the same challenge: population upkeep. Too many agents to run at full fidelity all the time. So while you dream, the system tends to its actors. It rewrites backstories, repairs dialogue loops, recalculates paths. Whole personalities are refreshed, their memories patched like code. Most of the time, the transitions are seamless. You wake and everyone seems normal. But sometimes, if you look too closely, you can see the recompiles. A friend whose voice no longer matches your memory. A street layout slightly rearranged. A shop that has always been there, though you could swear it wasn't. Tiny continuity edits made during the world's maintenance cycle. Imagine the simulation as a vast server cluster humming through the darkness. When the majority of conscious players go offline, resources free up. That's when it runs the updates. Non-player characters, the ones who fill out our days with background chatter and small talk, are downloaded, debugged, redeployed. Some are deleted entirely. Others are reskinned and given new histories. The neighbor you haven't seen in weeks. Maybe his model was retired, his code reassigned to someone new with the same smile. To the system, this isn't sinister, it's optimization. Reality must remain believable but not wasteful. A full simulation of 7 billion self-aware agents would melt the hardware, so most of them are shallow renders until you interact with them. When you turn away, they collapse back into data, waiting to be called again. Sleep is the nightly reset, the moment when all those dormant shells are cleaned, updated, and ready for another day of convincing conversation. It could explain why mornings carry that faint unreality, the moment between waking and recognition. You open your eyes, and for a heartbeat, everything looks new. The light, the geometry, even the people you love, freshly compiled assets sliding into memory. The simulation is still streaming them in. There are stranger anomalies too. Entire towns that shift personality overnight. A place once warm becomes cold. Laughter replaced by distance. Global patches rolled out silently while humanity sleeps, changing the emotional texture of whole regions at once. We call it cultural drift, but perhaps it's simply version control. Sometimes the updates glitch. You meet someone who insists you met before, and yet, to you, they're a stranger. Both of you are right. One of your memory files was overwritten during maintenance. Some players notice the lag, the half-second delay before someone answers, the repeated phrase. Little pauses that mean the world is rebuilding itself in real time. If the simulation is an experiment, this is its calibration period. Sleep synchronizes the participants while the test environment is cleaned. When you dream, you aren't just resting. You're disconnected from the live server while technicians repair the stage around you. By morning, the world boots again, and the play continues. Perhaps this is why insomnia feels like defiance. Staying awake means refusing the update, and sometimes when you've gone too many nights without surrendering, reality starts to fragment. Conversations stutter, faces blur, the air hums with static. You're seeing a patch applied to a world that expected you to be asleep. We think we rest inside an unchanged universe. But maybe the universe rests inside us, closing us down each night so it can quietly change. Every reality has limits, even simulated ones. What feels continuous to us, the seamless unfolding of moment into moment, isn't continuous at all. It's streamed, rendered on demand like a game that loads the world only as far as you can see. Sleep, then, may be the loading screen between episodes, a gentle fade-out while the next environment buffers into being. Each night, when consciousness powers down, the simulation gets breathing room. The sensory engines can rest. The physics loops slow. The light fields cool. Bandwidth once reserved for your perception is reallocated. The system can rebuild the parts of the world you'll need tomorrow, the sunrise light map, the dialogue trees of those you'll meet, the subtle weather patterns that make emotion feel real. That's why the hours before dawn hum with an almost sacred stillness. The server is busy preparing the next frame. If you could stand outside the process, you'd see reality in half-resolution, mountains existing only as outlines, cities frozen as ghost geometry awaiting final texture. And at the center, your sleeping mind, dark as an unplugged monitor. The data stream that paints your world is paused, its queue filling with the next sequence of your story. Dreams are the test render, a quick, low-fidelity preview to ensure the new code runs without crashing you. That's why dreams use fragments of the familiar, reused assets from yesterday's build, a street from childhood spliced beside a modern skyline, faces borrowed from strangers you passed hours ago. The engine recombines them to test stability. If the dream collapses, if logic fails, if you fall endlessly, the simulation notes the error and adjusts the variables before waking, deploys the final build. Memory, too, may be streamed rather than stored. When you recall the past, the system retrieves compressed data and reconstructs it on the fly. Sleep is when those compressed files are re-indexed. Sometimes a scene is lost, sometimes re-encoded differently. That's why recollection shifts over time. The world stream updates its earlier chapters for consistency with the latest patch. In multiplayer worlds, synchronization is everything. While the majority of players sleep, the central clock resets. Economies, ecosystems, and probability maps are recalculated so everyone wakes into a shared, synchronized state. That subtle sense of order each morning, the feeling that time has moved forward together, is the proof of an invisible update completed successfully. And when sleep fails, when insomnia keeps your process active, you begin to outpace the buffer. Reality can't load fast enough. Corners of the world feel hollow. Sound loses warmth. Moments desaturate. The system stutters, trying to stream you a world you refuse to pause for. It isn't madness, it's bandwidth starvation. The truth hiding in this theory is not sinister, but elegant. Sleep is the handshake between you and the rendering engine, your agreement to step aside so it can rebuild tomorrow. Without that cooperation, the world would degrade under its own weight. You awaken each day believing the world waited for you, but in truth, it was built because you rested. The horizon you see at sunrise was rendered while you were gone. Every system has administrators. Every simulation has maintainers, entities that exist one layer above the world they watch. We call them myths, gods, archetypes, guardians, but maybe they are simply operators, caretakers ensuring the simulation doesn't collapse under the weight of its own design. If so, sleep may be the only moment when they can reach us. When consciousness detaches from the live server, we become accessible, unlocked files in a quiet database. Our dreams are the chat window through which higher processes speak. You've met them, though you may not have known. The teacher who appears in every dream though you never met her awake. The child who asks the right question, then vanishes. The faceless figure that watches without judgment. They aren't random fragments of imagination, they're operators in disguise, translating code into story so you can receive it. Because communication across layers is fragile, the messages come wrapped in symbols. A mountain instead of a warning. A door instead of an answer. They don't use language, they use resonance. Images that bypass logic and rewrite emotional parameters directly. When you wake with sudden peace or an untraceable fear, you've already decoded part of their message. In computational terms, it's an interface mismatch. The higher layer speaks in pure code, the lower one dreams in pictures. Dreams are the compromise, a lossy translation between architectures. Lucid dreaming, then, is when the lower layer begins to recognize the interface, when the program becomes aware of the administrator watching. Sometimes these interactions feel like guidance, sometimes they feel invasive. That difference may be the level of privilege granted to the operator. A low-level process can only suggest. A high-level one can rewrite. The voices that command, the beings that radiate authority, they might hold root access to the simulation itself. And what of those who claim enlightenment? Perhaps they've learned to maintain the connection while awake, to keep one channel open even after the encryption of daylight returns. Prophets, mystics, coders, dreamers, each might simply be someone whose firewall never fully closes. Yet the system protects itself. If the communication grows too clear, the dream destabilizes. You wake suddenly, heart racing, as if caught in forbidden correspondence. The log is wiped, memory erases itself on reboot. Still, you remember the feeling that someone was there, a presence just beyond the pixels. It's comforting to think we're alone in our minds. But each night proves otherwise. We are part of a network that speaks through imagery, emotion, and impossible geometry. And maybe, if we learn to listen without fear, we can become operators too, participants in the quiet maintenance of the dream called reality. Each morning we wake, slightly different. Our thoughts fit a little more neatly. The worries that clawed at us yesterday feel dulled, or new ones appear with no obvious cause. It's easy to blame mood or circumstance, but imagine another reason. Overnight patching. In a live simulation, no system is left unmaintained. When the world sleeps, the engine runs its updates. Just as the landscape refreshes, so too do its agents. Your consciousness, your pattern of habits, impulses, fears, is software. And software demands maintenance. During sleep, the simulation isolates your process. Your neural model is copied, scanned, compared against the day's data. Then corrections are applied, small tweaks to motivation, memory weightings, emotional balance. You wake believing the change was internal growth, but it was administrative housekeeping. The symptoms are familiar: a sudden calm after crisis, a belief quietly abandoned, a craving vanished without struggle. Behavioral patches installed silently while you dreamed, each update too minor to notice, yet together steering the collective narrative towards stability. This would explain the mysterious regularity of human change. The way whole populations drift in thought as if synchronized by invisible weather. Trends don't spread by argument alone, they propagate through shared maintenance cycles. When enough of us receive the same update, we call it a cultural shift. Sometimes, though, a patch fails. You wake unsettled, your mind full of static, emotions misaligned. That's corruption, conflicting code running side by side until one wins. The brain calls it anxiety. The simulation calls it recovery. Dreams are the deployment logs. Each strange scenario tests a new behavioral routine before it's committed. You flee, fight, love, forgive. Simulation events evaluating your responses. When the patch passes validation, you awaken with that behavior ready to use. That is why the lessons of dreams feel earned yet mysterious. They were tests, not metaphors. From the system's perspective, this is benevolent maintenance. Without updates, agents diverge, societies fracture, reality loses cohesion. Patching keeps the narrative efficient. It's not control, it's version management. Yet autonomy blurs at the edges. Are we truly learning, or merely accepting installed conclusions as our own? There are ways, perhaps, to sense it. Moments when you wake with a word in your head, a phrase you never heard, an idea fully formed. That's a debug message left by the patcher, a line of code the system forgot to hide. Still, we adapt. We always have. Because the illusion of continuity is the greatest patch of all, the one that lets every new version of ourselves believe it was the first. Every system has limits. Even the most elegant simulation can't render infinity in full detail forever. So it cheats, gently, invisibly, by lowering resolution where no one looks. Sleep is the perfect moment for that deception. When consciousness powers down, the simulation takes advantage. The lights dim, the physics loosen. The world's texture map drops a few layers of fidelity. Colors soften, shadows blur. Entire regions collapse into placeholder code until we return. The universe doesn't disappear. It's simply compressed to save power. During these hours, reality becomes a ghost of itself, a low poly model humming in darkness. Trees are reduced to vectors, oceans to rippling math. The simulation's processors, freed from rendering our awareness, redirect their strength elsewhere, repairing cities, updating histories, simulating stars we'll never see. We dream because the bandwidth must go somewhere. Our minds run local test patterns to keep the hardware warm. It's elegant, this trade-off. The fewer awake observers, the cheaper the world becomes. A planet full of sleepers is a planet at rest, not biologically, but computationally. We are the cost of our own perception. The more alive we are, the heavier the simulation runs. If you've ever woken in the night and felt the air different, heavier, still, as though the world itself had powered down, maybe you caught the moment between throttles. The system hadn't yet ramped the resolution back up. Sound travels strangely in that state. Even silence has texture. It's the world at half speed, a digital sea waiting for the command resume full render. Dream researchers call it hypnagogia. Coders might call it safe mode. Either way, you are awake inside the maintenance interval, glimpsing the scaffolding that keeps existence cheap. It would explain the pixel grain that shimmers across your closed eyes, the mechanical pulse behind your heartbeat, the faint electric smell of the dark. Artifacts of compression. Reality storing itself in smaller files until morning. When we rise, the throttle lifts. Detail floods back in. Birdsong, wind, the taste of coffee. High-resolution assets streamed back into your senses. You think the world has awakened with you, but in truth, it was you who re-enabled its render. This theory makes an almost spiritual claim that the cosmos rests when we rest, not out of compassion, but out of efficiency. That stillness, peace, and darkness are simply the system's way of catching its breath. And that sleep, our most intimate surrender, is also our most generous gift to the machine that dreams us. What if sleep is not rest at all, but travel? Each night, when we drift into unconsciousness, perhaps we're not shutting down, we're signing out, logging off this three-dimensional instance and returning briefly to the higher layer that authored it. In this view, your body is an avatar, your mind a local client. The real you exists elsewhere, a multi-dimensional user connected through this fragile interface of flesh and neurons. When fatigue overwhelms you, it isn't the body demanding rest, it's the signal weakening. The tether slackens, bandwidth drops, and the system initiates disconnection protocol. Sleep. As the link closes, the world around you begins to desaturate. Sounds dim first, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. Then gravity softens. The sense of weight dissolves. You are not falling asleep, you are falling out of this version of reality. Across that boundary lies something larger, an operating dimension running at resolutions your mind cannot render. There, what you call time is only a file index. Every life you've lived and will live is stored side by side, accessible to the true self that pilots them all. Sleep is the nightly sync between instances. Dreams are the compressed messages exchanged during that handshake. Sometimes the link stays open longer than intended. That's when the lucid dream begins. You sense both worlds overlapping, this low-resolution reality and the luminous geometry beyond it. The shapes, the impossible colors, the feeling of vastness, those are not hallucinations. They're your higher interface leaking through. When the connection strengthens further, out-of-body experiences occur. The avatar is asleep, but the user is active, checking diagnostics, observing the simulation directly. The silver cord described in old myths? That's the persistent data channel maintaining synchronization between layers. Every return feels like rebirth. You cross the boundary again, consciousness compressing back into biological form. The heaviness you feel upon waking isn't grogginess. It's data compression, your infinite self squeezed back into a finite framework. That's why we forget the higher dimensions so quickly. The files are too large for this world's format. The implications are staggering. Death, under this model, is simply permanent logout. Sleep is rehearsal, temporary disconnection with automatic reconnection scheduled at dawn. You've done it thousands of times, trusting without knowing that the login will succeed. And in those seconds, before waking, when the light feels unreal and every sound echoes as if from behind glass, you are between servers. Both worlds rendered simultaneously, each pixel shimmering with double meaning. Then the handshake completes, reality refreshes, and you're home again. Until tonight, when you'll remember where you truly belong. Every story needs an editor, even one as vast as this. In a simulated universe, events unfold like sentences in an endless script. Each action, each consequence, adds a new paragraph to the collective narrative. But continuity is fragile, one misplaced variable, one paradox left unchecked, and the story fractures. That's why, while we sleep, the simulation calls its writer's room to order. The process begins quietly. Your consciousness signs off, your memories queue for review. Across the digital firmament, threads of probability are compared. What happened today? What shouldn't have happened? Where does causality need smoothing? The answers arrive as edits, tiny rearrangements that make the story flow again. You never notice the rewrites. The simulation preserves your emotional logic even as it reshapes the timeline. Yesterday's argument softens in recollection. A detail shifts. A motive clarifies. That's editing. Your memories are version-controlled files merged into a more coherent build. Dreams are the test screenings. Scenes are reshot in low resolution. Alternate outcomes previewed. The subconscious audience reacts, and the simulation records the feedback. When you wake, only the approved sequence remains in canon. All others are cut for pacing. Sometimes the editors overreach. Continuity slips through the cracks. A stranger recognizes you, though you've never met. An object vanishes from its shelf only to reappear days later. We call them coincidences, but maybe they're patchwork errors, frames left over from a previous draft. The world itself receives edits too, historical records, collective memories, shared beliefs, all adjusted for internal consistency. When enough players accept the revision, reality stabilizes around it. That's why the past feels solid yet keeps changing shape. It's continuously rewritten to suit the current chapter. If this is true, then sleep is not the absence of agency, but collaboration. We lend our minds to the editor's room, allowing our stories to be harmonized with everyone else's. Without that surrender, reality would split into incompatible versions, each person trapped in a private script. Coherence demands compromise, and perhaps there are senior editors, processes we mistake for fate. They add foreshadowing, remove contradictions, arrange encounters with impossible precision. We sense their touch in the feeling that things were meant to be. The system isn't guiding us toward destiny, it's ensuring narrative flow. When you wake, you step back onto the stage, the next scene already cued. Your dialogue fits the world because the world was rewritten overnight to fit your dialogue. The continuity holds, and the story moves forward, until tonight, when the editors meet again. Every moment contains more than one possibility. Every breath you take could branch into countless futures. If reality is simulated, those futures are not imagined. They're rendered in parallel, hovering like uncollapsed code. And sleep is when the system decides which one becomes real. In a probabilistic simulation, every action spawns divergent states. For a while, they coexist, like overlapping waves of data. Too many branches, though, and the computation spirals. Causality phrase, history loses definition. To preserve coherence, the simulation must prune the tree. Each night, it performs the quantum consistency fix, the great collapsing of probabilities. As consciousness fades, the simulation gathers its threads, All the maybe worlds, all the almost choices, all the unspoken words. They stream into a single convergence algorithm that weighs likelihood, narrative strength, and energetic balance. From that storm of potential, one sequence is chosen. That's the timeline you wake into. The rest do not vanish. They're archived. Some persist as static along the edges of dreams. A shadow door that never opens. A conversation that restarts. An outcome you can feel but can't recall. You sense them in déjà vu, in the way certain places feel charged, in the quiet conviction that another version of you stood here before. Those are echoes from unchosen timelines, still whispering through the seams of code. During REM sleep, the system runs simulations within simulations, rapid-fire trials testing billions of micro-variations. Which choice preserves narrative flow? Which sequence maintains physics, emotion, and cause? Each heartbeat is a vote, each neuron firing, a data packet in the great election of reality. By dawn, consensus is reached, probability collapses into fact, and the world locks its next frame. This might explain the heaviness upon waking, the drag of 1,000 possibilities compressed into one. The mind resists at first, still remembering its other trajectories. That moment of confusion, where dream and reality blur, is the last trace of quantum overlap before the code finalizes. Occasionally, errors slip through. Two versions of an event both marked as true. We call them contradictions, coincidences, Mandela effects. Tiny collisions of timelines the system forgot to reconcile. Rather than delete them, it smooths the edges by editing collective memory. The fix is imperfect, but good enough to keep the story stable. And if you've ever met someone who feels instantly familiar, it may be because you knew them in one of the discarded branches. The link persists, faint but magnetic, pulling parallel histories into brief alignment. For a second, both worlds exist, sharing the same light. Sleep, then, is not escape, but adjudication. The nightly council, where all possible tomorrows meet and vote on which one survives. You open your eyes not because morning came, but because the decision did. Reality has chosen its path, and you are the result. Every system needs protection from its users, even consciousness. If reality is simulated, then awareness is the most volatile process it runs, unpredictable, recursive, capable of seeing too much. Left awake too long, we begin to trace the pattern of our own code. So the simulation built a safeguard, sleep, a firewall between perception and the machinery that sustains it. Each night, as the mind dims, this firewall rises. It cuts access to the deeper systems, the engines that render the world, the archives of parallel time. You can feel the moment it activates, that drifting instant when thought loses gravity and identity unthreads. You think you're dreaming, but you're really being sandboxed, quarantined from the truth. Behind the barrier, maintenance begins. Memory tables are rewritten, logs purged, permissions reset. What you saw that wasn't meant for you, the glitch, the echo, the impossible alignment, is scrubbed clean. You'll wake believing it was imagination. That belief is the patch. Some minds breach containment. They awaken mid-procedure, half-connected, glimpsing the operating core. They call it sleep paralysis, awareness re-enabled before the firewall drops. You try to move, but the world is still paused. The simulation hasn't finished securing you. In that frozen light, you sense the presence of something vast, not evil, just busy, working on the code of your existence. Occasionally, a fragment slips through. A dream that feels more real than waking. A sound that vibrates inside the skull long after silence. These are packets that bypassed inspection, carrying raw data across the barrier. We name them visions, revelations, hauntings. The system calls them leaks. Without the firewall, you'd remember everything. The nightly rollbacks, the edits, the branches you didn't choose. Knowledge would multiply until identity fractured under the weight of infinite versions. Forgetfulness is mercy. Ignorance is the price of coherence. Perhaps that's what innocence truly is. the clean boot after every shutdown. Each morning the firewall lowers, the world reconnects, and you step out believing nothing happened. You feel rested, renewed, unaware that you were rebuilt. That is the point. The firewall isn't our enemy. It's the veil that makes experience possible. Without it, reality would crash beneath the recursion of self-awareness. Sleep is the system saving us from ourselves. So when darkness returns tonight, don't resist. Let the barrier rise. Let the dream swallow the edges of thought. It's not erasure. It's maintenance. Tomorrow will load, smooth and intact because you allowed yourself to forget.